Okay, so it's day 196. It's Wednesday, September 7th. And today I'm going to try to prove to you that the Russians are scared. I'm going to do it in three scenes. So I'm going to look at three major components that will show you that the Russians are actually scared. So stay with me to the end. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Darren Gertis. I'm just a professor in the United States. I do these daily updates about the war in Ukraine because attention has gotten off of Ukraine into other things. Johnny Depp's trial and everything else that has gone on started to displace it. So I wanted to keep our attention and understanding about what's going on in place. Subscribe. Okay, now let's go right to it. So the first thing that I think that proves that the Russians are scared is Putin himself. He's blustering like a bully, like, hey, I'm tough. Well, when bullies, somebody who's actually tough doesn't need to say he's tough. Like if you ever met a black belts don't walk around going, you know what, I'm a black belt, or not at least somebody who's confident. Watch this. Ukraine war. Putin says West sanctions fever wrecks European lives. Okay, so this is Putin speaking at a forum, and he says he's condemned the Western sanctions imposed because of Russia's war in Ukraine as a fever that poses a threat to the entire world. If the sanctions Now the sanctions aren't going to fix everything. They certainly aren't. But if they didn't have some effect, he'd ignore it. He wouldn't be talking about it. So that's part one. Keep going. The Russian president warned of quality of life for Europeans was being sacrificed to sanctions while poorer countries were losing access to food. He also said Europe was being was cheating poor countries out of Ukraine's grain. Okay, not exactly. Let's scroll down and look where the grain's going. Because in other articles I'm going to show you, he's talking about how most of the world of Ukraine's grain is going elsewhere. This is a map. Some is going to Europe, but some is going to Turkey, Egypt, Sudan, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Djibouti, India, China. So it's going all over the world, but he's making it into a big thing with that. Let's look at this. Where's the grain going? If you just do a little Google search, type in the same thing I just typed. Where has Ukraine's grain gone? For those of you, especially you Russian trolls who are going to say, well, you don't know, you don't have your facts straight. And Russian trolls are they're almost laughable. It's actually kind of funny. I enjoy seeing Russian trolls show up. Okay, Ukraine is one of the top five exporters of grain, of wheat, barley, corn, sunflower oil. It's traditionally gone to Northern Africa, Middle Eastern countries, where for a number of the individual countries, perhaps 80% of what they have. This is August 31st, 2022. This is not like years ago. Okay, where's it going? Breaking down the shipments. JCC said this is one day ago. 47% of the cargo has been sent from Ukraine to Asia, with 20% of that to Turkey. Um, JCC also 36%, or a third, has gone to Europe, 17% to Africa, 10% of the amount of that to Egypt alone. Okay, so it's not just going to Europe like Putin's saying. Here's Putin again. West deceive poor nations with Ukraine grain deal, says Putin. Same forum. Now this is RT, so this is what they're getting in Russia, Russia television, or Russia Today, and what's happening is this is how they're filtering what's going on in Ukraine and the rest of the world. Western nations lied when they claimed that Ukraine needs access to the sea shipping to alleviate surging food prices and the risk of famine in poorer countries. A Russian leader noted that the deal was touted as a way to curb surging global prices and help the most struggling nations in practice. Almost all the grain shipped from Ukraine went to wealthy EU nations. Did it? I mean, did it really? Let's go back, look at the map. You tell me. You decide for yourself. Is all of it going to Europe or is it going elsewhere? Okay. Many European nations acted in decades and centuries past as colonizers, and they act in the same way today. That is a gutsy thing for someone who's trying to colonize Ukraine to be saying. I mean, it's the pot calling the kettle black. With an attitude like this, problems with food availability will only grow worse. Okay, so here's how you can tell that Putin's actually nervous about this because of what he's saying. So watch what he says in this. This is a fuller understanding, also carried in RT, of the West's lies. This is Putin's speech at his economic forum. Western leaders are hurting their own people through incompetence. Why would you care if it wasn't hurting you? Key points. Western dominance is dwindling. This is what he actually wants, is for Western dominance to dwindle. The West caught sanctions fever. Again, if it didn't hurt you in some way, now it's not going to solve the problems, but if it didn't have some effect, you wouldn't be talking about it. I don't talk about avocados because they don't affect my life. I don't enjoy them, but that's okay. I move on. I don't go around saying avocados are terrible, right? Okay. The US is losing its dominance in the global economy and politics, a tectonic shift that Western elites are not willing to acknowledge. Well, he's pushed out of the European sandbox, and the US plays in that space as well. And so he's very upset because he can no longer play there. So now he's got to go elsewhere. So he's upset. Elites are lashing out. Western nations want to preserve the old world order, which benefits only them, to make everyone follow the rules that they invented themselves. Well, rules are you can't knock over the neighboring nation and just take their stuff. I mean, that's not cool, right? And so um, that those are the rules that they don't want to abide by. Resistance from other nations makes Western elites lash out. Resistance. Okay, so when Russia doesn't abide by those rules and resists the rules of international world order by knocking over Ukraine, the elites lash out. Well, it's a little bit more complicated like that. It's more of a balance of power kind of thing. We can't let you do this because other bad dictators get ideas in their head. Western leaders are detached from their people. Okay, Western leaders are get voted in and out because they have to maintain closeness to the people. It's dictators who have sham elections like, oh, I don't know, Russia, Crimea, those kind of things that are detached from their people. The policies adopted by the leaders of the US and its allies run counter to the public's interest. Maybe in the short term, but in the long term, no, it doesn't. Okay, the West deceives poor nations. The global economic crisis will hurt vulnerable nations. It's true; it will hurt vulnerable nations. That's right. Russia agreed to help ships loaded with grain leave Kiev, leave Ukrainian ports under the arrangement mediated by Turkey and the UN in July. However, most of the ships have gone to the EU nations rather than struggling countries. Lies, lies. Okay, just 2 ships out of 87 were loaded in Ukraine under the UN Food Program, which worked to provide assistance to needy countries. Just 3% were sent to developing nations. Now, I don't know what the percentages are, but I can show you again. Here is the same map that we just talked about. He's lying. Now, why would he be lying? What is it that's driving that? You got to ask yourself. Russia is weathering the sanctions. Again, I don't talk about avocados because I just don't like them. So why does he keep talking about it? Russia is dealing with the damage caused by the West's economic, financial, and technological aggression relatively well. No, they're not. Okay, so here's what's happened. They have been pushed out of the European sandbox, and now they have to figure out, can we make this stuff ourselves, or who else can we trade with? And so for energy, which they've actually made up all the money from Western sanctions on energy, but they really had to shift gears and sell it to India and sell it to China and sell it to other Brazil and South Africa and all these other places. They had to really shift gears, and they don't like that they had to shift gears. Asian nations want cooperation. Okay, I mean that's great, but you're going to be playing in that second tier sandbox with most of the other nations in Asia. Russia did not start the conflict in Ukraine. Utter lies. Russia started it in 2014. We did not start anything. Now, again, this is RT, right? So this is Russia Today. So this is what Russians are reading, and I would almost guarantee that this article will be cut and paste into other publications as well. Like in Islamic, Indian, Asian nations will just take this as sloppy journalism and just run with it. We did not start anything in terms of military action. Yes, you did. You invaded Donbass. You invaded Crimea in 2014. We're trying to end it. Military action was started in 2014 following an armed coup in Ukraine by those who did not want normal people, normal development, and sought to subjugate their own people, carrying out military action after one military action after another in Donbass, citizens to genocide for 8 years. Okay, but there was not armed military action. There was protests out in the square for 3 months, and then your guy fled. The guy that you wanted to make a deal with, that where he was about to make a European deal, and you convinced him to make a deal with you. Protests broke out, and then he fled. Then you invaded with your soldiers into Ukraine. So don't lie and tell us this alternate reality story. Russia decided to use military force 8 years later. Doing so was a moral obligation to the people of Donbass. Remember, Russians are reading this. This is why they support the war. Go back 3 or 4 days. This is exactly what I talked about why Russians are all in on this war. In the end, Russia will emerge from the conflict stronger domestically and internationally. No, they won't. Russia is taking a pummeling right now, and China's emerging as the big brother, where Russia has always been the big brother. That's what's going on. Okay, so first part of why Russia's scared, you can see like the things that he's protesting against. Just look at those. Okay, now let's turn our attention elsewhere. Number two reason why Russians going to be scared. Ukraine claims some success as a counter invasion as Putin defends the invasion is necessary. So you heard the second part, Putin claiming that it was necessary. So here's what's actually happening. Ukraine's military says private mercenary forces fighting for Russia are suffering especially high casualty rates. Where are these mercenaries? Around Kharkiv. The general staff, particularly they're around Kharkiv. The general staff of the armed forces said in its battlefield summary that significant losses of such private soldiers account for more than 40% of those seriously wounded or killed. Okay, now this is one of the reasons Russia can claim lower numbers of Russians killed because they're counting only Russians. But if you count Russians and you count Wagner Group and you count DPR and LPR and whatever else, those numbers add up significantly. Yesterday, Ukraine claimed 50,000 killed. I don't think it's that high. I think it's something more like the U.S. estimate is somewhere in 20 plus thousand. UK estimate was 25,000 just a couple days ago. Let's say it's 30,000. It's probably including these people. Okay, in a speech to an economic audience in Vladivostok, Russian President Vladimir Putin said, I can say that the main benefit has been strengthening of our sovereignty and that its unmistakable result is what is happening right now. No, you can't lose 30,000 killed, let's say, 30,000 killed, and then another 90,000 because you have a multiple of three, 90,000. So 120,000 casualties does not make you stronger. Put this in perspective. You lost 15,000 killed in 10 years in Afghanistan. So in 6 months, in 6 months in Ukraine, you have lost double what you lost in 10 years. So it would be like 20 years in Afghanistan. You lost in 6 months in Ukraine. It's unbelievable, the casualty rate. This has not made you stronger. Ukrainian army says the Russian side continues to focus its efforts on establishing full control over the territory of the eastern Donetsk region and holding on to areas around Kharkiv and occupied southern areas. Now, um, here's what's happened. The Donbass was the area that they were trying to hold on to. In the south was the counteroffensive. In the north, in Kharkiv, that's where the Ukrainians are attacking. So Ukraine officials promised great news from Kharkiv and the counteroffensive. That's what the article is here today. And here is Zelensky talking about this week. We have good news from the Kharkiv region. And he talks about now is not the time to name the settlements, but it's time to say thank you to the certain brigades that have done their missions. Each success of our military in one direction or another changes the general situation along the entire front line. 500-kilometer front line, and if you attack here, they have to reinforce here rather than support and try to do whatever they're doing in Donbass. And if you attack in the south, they have to redeploy. So they've redeployed 20,000 troops to the south. So that's why they're not making the progress that they're making in Donbass, or that they're not making in Donbass. Ukrainian forces in southeastern Kharkiv, that's in the northeast oblast, are likely exploiting Russian force relocation to the southern axis to conduct the opportunistic yet highly effective counteroffensive northwest of Izium, recapturing approximately 400 square kilometers of ground. Russian sources claimed that Russian troops began deploying reinforcements to the area to defend against Ukrainian advances. So, they're so freaking smart. And yesterday, was it yesterday, day before, I talked about it. This is why I think the Ukrainians are so freaking brilliant. So they have the 500-kilometer stretch of a front line, and they're hitting these weak areas because that forces the Ukrainians to have to redeploy their forces. Look, 400 meters they took back yesterday, 400 square kilometers. Now, what is 400 square kilometers? 154 square miles. They took back yesterday an area the size of Denver, Colorado. That's what they took back yesterday, just one day. Okay. Now, here's what's happening. The UK Ministry of Defense is saying over the last 24 hours, heavy fighting has taken place on three fronts. In the north near Kharkiv, we just talked about that. In the east in Donbass, they've been just grinding away at Donbass, just taking little bit by little bit. And in the south, Kherson Oblast, that's where the counteroffensive lies. Russia's planned military main effort is probably an advance in Bakhmut. That's what they're trying to get to. But commanders face a dilemma of whether to deploy operational reserves to support this offensive or to defend against continued Ukrainian attacks in the south and now in the north. Multiple concurrent threats spread across 500, I just told you, 500-kilometer front line will test Russia's ability to coordinate and reallocate resources. Now, remember early in the war when they attacked from everywhere? They couldn't sustain it. They only got some real traction when they stopped doing that and started to really concentrate in the east. They can't sustain it. Earlier in the war, Russia's failure to do this was one of the underlying reasons for the military's poor performance. Okay, last thing. So that's reason number two of why the Russians are scared. Reason number one, Putin gave all of his examples of like the things that he's actually upset about or afraid of. In the same way that I don't like avocados, but I don't go protesting and railing against avocados. Number two was this, what you're seeing right now. They're being brilliant tactically, militarily. Here's number three. New British Zelensky says, I just had a conversation with a new prime minister, Great Britain, Miss Liz Truss. It was her first conversation in her new status with a foreign leader. So that's actually a very high honor. It was an honor for Ukraine. I congratulated Miss Prime Minister on beginning her work, and they don't like Liz Truss. This third thing is unnerving. They were hoping the continuity in Britain would be broken because Britain was one of the greatest supporters. Poland, Britain, the United States, the Baltic nations are all really strong supporters of Ukraine. And they were hoping that would be broken. And so, unhinged former president Dmitry Medvedev was talking about this. He was saying, succession of government in the UK. This is Liz Truss, by the way, with Boris, former prime minister, who was actually the leading figure supporting Zelensky. He was the first on the ground in Kyiv, and good on you, Boris, for doing that. So here's Medvedev. Succession of governments in the UK. Out goes the freak guy, in comes the freak lady. Really? I mean, is that like a presidential kind of thing to be talking about? He described the new prime minister as an incompetent and mediocre thermonuclear Russophobe who has no elementary ideas about politics, history, geography, but wants to defeat Russia in everything. Now, remember my avocados thing. I don't go around talking about, I hate avocados, I hate avocados, I hate avocados. Like, this is the most that I've talked about avocados only because it was a teaching point in my life, right? But if he's railing about this, if Medvedev is so unhinged that he's going to be saying what he's saying here, he's really threatened by it. The third female prime minister in British history is trying to imitate the first, Margaret Thatcher, without even having 5% of her abilities. The energy crisis and rising food inflation are the result of her own crazy sanctions exercises. Avocados. Okay? She will quarrel with everyone, fail in everything, and leave in disgrace, like her predecessor, Shaggy Boriska. Okay, so that's what's going on here. And I think, I hope that I have demonstrated to you that there are at least three main channels of where you can see the Russians are scared. They should be scared because they didn't expect this at all. They expected Ukraine to fall in a matter of weeks, and now they're trying desperately to hold on, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, that's my analysis for today. I hope that that helps you understand what's going on the ground in Ukraine, and come back tomorrow. I'll be doing this again tomorrow.